Hey, welcome to this episode of Hollywood Breaks. It's great to be with you today. Keith and I had an interesting talk about how Netflix is becoming a voice and a platform, very different than this content machine it's been for many, many years, and how others have fallen, the Will Smiths and even the Batgirls of the world. So, very interesting episode. Please enjoy this episode of Hollywood Breaks. When I saw your list of what we're going to talk about today, I thought you were missing the Will Smith apology.
Ugh, really? You actually make me talk about it, right?
Yeah. Well, what am I?
Well, people can go read the Founders Brew. I talked about it there.
Well, that's why I thought we were gonna. I mean, that's why we're gonna talk about it, because you kind of hit it there. But it's I mean, what are we gonna say about it? And I think everyone else has somewhat kind of expressed what they know is the reality of it. To me, there are two offensive parts about the apology, and I'm now breaking down someone else's apology. So this is, listen to us. We're sidelining on the sideline. But one is like he's wearing his brand right in the center of it. So like, just in case you're wondering who I'm working for, this is all about, let's promote the brand here. Make sure that's being seen.
Yeah.
But then also, what's the deal with the cue card thing? I mean, isn't the guy an Oscar award-winning actor? Couldn't he pull off a better than like, why did you hit Chris Rock? Well, listen, I don't know. It was just
it was very prepackaged, and I think the cue cards were a way to make it feel like it was authentic, that he wasn't trying to be prepackaged. Like, oh, look, we didn't do any Hollywood magic tricks with this. We're being real. Like, look, we even just used cue cards. Listen, I think, as I mentioned,
did he really not know the question? Like, do you need a cue card for that question?
He knew the question. He knew it was coming. They probably rehearsed it.
The question
for they've been rehearsing it since the day after the Oscars, I'm sure. Oh
man.
I think like Matt Belloni had a really good sort of point by point takedown of the apology in his what I'm hearing, which I linked in the Founders Brew newsletter. But I think ultimately this is about, he has a movie coming out, Emancipation, which is Apple TV Plus. It's another awards play. It's a big movie. They spent a buttload of money on it. And they can't start the promotion until he comes out and faces the public. Now, my feeling of this has always been, we know how he really felt right after the incident. He didn't apologize. He equivocated. He tried to justify it. He didn't leave. He stayed to get his award. And then he went out and partied all night at the Vanity Fair party and just pretended like nothing happened. And then, only then, the next day, when he realized that everyone had kind of turned against him and we're all on Chris Rock's side, then he realized, oh, damn, I have to apologize. So I don't think anybody really believes this is sincere. It's all about, he's trying to save his career, which I think has been irreparably damaged. I mean, listen, I'm willing to admit I'm wrong, and that Emancipation could be a huge hit. But I think he's done irreparable damage to his career, and I don't really see, you don't really see any real sincerity coming from any of this. Like the way it was, like you said, the fact he was wearing a hat with his brand. Like if he had just done, like, picked up a phone and recorded something and said, listen, I've had a long time to think about it. I've had a long time to think about this. I know I screwed up. I know my actions the night of were totally reprehensible. I shouldn't have done what I did. I'm sorry to Chris. I'm sorry to his family. I'm ready. I want to talk to him, but I understand he's not ready. Like little things like that to show that he's actually sorry. And you don't see any of that. It's all just manufactured because he's got a movie coming out. And I tie this obviously in the newsletter between sort of the ever-changing mode of celebrity, because there was the Blonde trailer came out for which is Marilyn Monroe biopic from Netflix. And I was sort of contrasting how, that version of celebrity was so managed. They kept all the problems underneath the rug. But at the same time, you got all this, you got attention and money, but you sacrificed your private life. And let's be honest, Marilyn Monroe was abused in all different kinds of ways. And then you flip to the present age of celebrity where they can basically get away with anything they want, because we've sort of elevated to the point where they're the otherworldly, versus back then, they were managed because the studios knew that there were certain decorums that had to be held. You were expected to act like a human being.
They were an asset to an industry. Yeah.
And you were expected to act like a human being and not go far field of sort of what the acceptable behavior in society was at the time. Now it's just like, well, they're become so otherworldly, and so their egos have exploded to the point where they can, like Will Smith feels he can walk up, assault someone on stage, go back, verbally assault them twice, and pretend like everything's fine.
Yeah. I know, but it also, like, the celebrity culture is just, the TikTok world and everything else. The celebrity culture is just everywhere. So if you are a Hollywood actor compared to a TikTok star, the world has melding it all together to just, almost famousness.
I compared it to like America. They were back in the sort of the days of Marilyn Monroe, although yes, they were controlled, and they were owned basically by the studios. They were more or less considered American royalty, like other, like, sort of like on this pedestal, but at the same time still something to sort of admire in a lot of ways. And they followed they followed the rules, and they weren't crazy. But we later learned that was because the studios kind of put a lot of cans on things that didn't come out. But then that sort of shifted, and in the 60s, as everything sort of shifted in the 60s, it became this sort of, they went from being otherworldly to being this, sorry about that, they came from being otherworldly to from royalty to becoming this otherworldly force that could pretty much live by their own rules and not really be fearful of any consequences to their behavior.
It's interesting because the voice of Hollywood, would just say, maybe that's an easier way of like summarizing what we're kind of looking for, or what we're used to hearing, is like a voice of Hollywood has a perspective of, in easiest way of saying it is like promotion, right? Mm-hmm. It's people promoting themselves, promoting a film, promoting their friends. That's what the award ceremonies are about. That's what every trailer is about. That's honest what every news article that you read about somebody famous is about. It's about, it's a PR agent promoting. Mm-hmm. You're talking about, like that promotion in the early days was somewhat controlled because they didn't want any word out of play. So you went to dinner with somebody already controlled. You dated somebody controlled. That was spun purposefully for the purpose of promotion. Mm-hmm. Today, like, I wonder if just all the noise requires, these extreme situations to be heard. Not hitting somebody, I don't mean like that, but just the extreme at which people go to, and the amount of the volume of what crap that they create. And it has to be user driven content in order to keep up with the insane demand for consumption for this stuff. That you can understand why it's falling apart. What's the correction? If you were a strategist working for an agency right now, and they were talking about the next phase of Hollywood and how we have to put things back in alignment, or whatever the words they might use, mm-hmm. what would your advice be?
Well, I mean, are you talking more about promo, or what? I'm trying to.
I should say so. Yeah, no. To summarize, like, just the idea of like promotion, the intent of everything we talked about celebrity in the past and even in the present is about promotion. I'm selling a show, a makeup line, clothing line, whatever.
Right.
So we know promotion will always continue.
Yes.
Like, that's not going to stop. No. But the evolution from a controlled environment to an out of control environment.
Yes.
What is the next phase? That would be,
I mean, I honestly think,
what would you do?
Yeah, I think it's somewhat in the middle. I think a lot of what has gone on over the course of the last few years is sort of overcorrection in a lot of ways versus trying to be a more moderate in the middle. And I think that's kind of the way of going about this. And, I understand the thought process of promoting and, being out there in force. But I think one of the things that is most important is that the people are able to believe you in whatever role you take on. And that involves sort of not being so front and center. You're not being, doing the promotion when needed, because that's just part of the game, but then backing off. Like, you don't really, I mean, yes, we hear a lot about Leonardo DiCaprio and, you know, when he's out in his yacht, but he doesn't go to the hot spots all the time. I'm often reminded of one actor whose name is escaping me once said, listen, you can be anonymous here. This is a guy talking about LA. It's like, you can be anonymous here. There are places, you know, that if you go, you're going to get photographed. And a lot of those photos are all planned. It's all like, oh, we're going to go to Nobu and Malibu because, and then they get the tip. You know, they're not told, because that's sort of the unwritten rule, that when the publicist calls the photographer and says, so and so are going to be at Nobu tonight, they don't tell them they're going to be. So it looks more, oh, I'm being photographed. There's a way around that where you can still be natural and still have a bit of a mystique to you. And I think then people are more likely to believe you in whatever role you might have. And I think that's why you have a lot of like take a Ryan Gosling, for example. I think he's he might be one of the most universally beloved actors. Everybody really likes him. Nobody really complains about him because you don't see him. He doesn't have social media. He does what he has to do. And then he goes back into his family. It's a job to him. It's not a life. And a lot of people in the industry now look at it as a life, and not just, you know, it's who they are, not what they do. And I think that's sort of the correction right there. You kind of have to meet in the middle. You do the promo where you have to. You don't go nuts on social media. And, you know, I think that's the way to sort of bring it back. So they don't know a ton about your life. And I think that's a part of the interest, is they can believe you in a character role because they don't know a ton about you personally. And I think that's a big part of it.
It is interesting. By the way, I just took me in a note to make a reservation at Nobu Malibu. I didn't realize that's where all the celebrities were. I needed to get some autographs.
Yeah, if you ever, you know, you're bound to find somebody there. It's a pretty hot spot.
Okay, I'm going to pivot here because you said Ryan Gosling.
Please,
and I did watch The Gray Man. Did you watch it yet?
No, Tim. I'm telling you, I'm in Maine. I'm gonna be lagging on the content while I'm up here. Okay. I can rely on you since you're still in the land of the living.
I don't think there's any confusion of how I feel about Netflix content.
Yes,
right now, I think I've been pretty. Yes.
Yeah, they have a quality control problem.
It was. I also didn't mind. I feel like I'm showing my stripes a little bit, but I didn't mind the red notice. I get what's going on there. I mean, it's a genre. It's a little bit, you know, cheesy. It was a spectacular kind of like piece there. The blow up scenes, the chase scenes, what have you. For the most part, the actors were great. You know, there's always just seems to be like at some level they go from, you know, people they know that can act to a level where they are just grabbing students off the beach from UCLA and throwing them in a scene. I don't know what's happening with that next level. But yeah, I'm just I kind of like wish Netflix, and maybe this is what's going to happen, is like maybe Netflix is going to slow down a little bit and start realizing how movies are actually made. Like this idea of a blockbuster is important instead of just infinite content. And I wonder if that's like Recession, like in the Recession, if that's not a opportunity for them to make an excuse to focus differently.
Well, yeah, I mean, Scott Stuber, the head of Netflix Film, has been saying for a while now, and most recently, that, you know, they have to start paying tighter attention to quality. And, you know, I often roll my eyes anytime someone says, we just need to make good movies. I'm like, oh, wow. Thanks, Captain Obvious. Where you been all my life? You know, what a great idea. Gee, I wonder what other genius has been thinking about that. Maybe every studio exec since time immemorial. But I mean, yeah, I understand it. I think the reality is they do need to be a little bit more focused on their quality versus quantity. And I think that's kind of what the mantra is. I frankly, I'm surprised that Scott Stuber still passes his keeper tests, but I think it's because he has very solid relationships in town. And I think that's a big part of, and I don't know if Ted Sarandos has those kind of relationships. So that's why I think he keeps Stuber around, because Stuber's had a very sort of up and down track record at Netflix. I mean, yes, they get a lot of millions of views, but the movies aren't exactly what I would call great. Listen, we'll see. I do want to watch Gray Man. I like Chris Evans. I like Ryan Gosling. I like the sort of concept of it. I like the look of it. I like the Russo brothers. I mean, listen, if I were in Stuber's seat, I probably would have greenlit the movie too. I can't. I mean, how would you look at that package and be like, "Man, pass"?
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have spent $200 million on it, but there was this whole.
It looked expensive. I'm gonna say, like, it did kind of
Well,
look
I mean,
expensive.
the whole article. There was an article about it, and it was at Sony, and Sony, the chairman of Sony, is Tom Rothman, and he's noticeably to be very budget conscious. He wanted to make it for 70. And the Russo brothers were like, there's no way we can make this movie for 70 and make it look the way we want it to look. So they ran to Netflix and got 200. So, I mean, I get it. Some of the reviews I have read, now granted, these are reviews. I haven't seen the movie. I don't want to qualify my statement, but it seems to have come across as very formulaic, things we've seen before, nothing new.
Yeah, totally. That's what Red Notice was too. Like, I appreciated Red Notice, but I know it's that formula.
I guess
it's
given
so easy.
Yeah, I guess given the caliber of talent they had attached, I would expect something a little bit more original. But
I'd say what's fair is the characterization was great from the actors. They all, I thought, did that well. Chris Evans was really fun. His character was just an asshole, and he did it perfectly.
Which makes me worry that he's actually an asshole, but maybe he's a really good actor.
I have a feeling he's not. There's just something kind of fun in there. But yeah, to me, I think there's an evolution part of it. And again, like, just the idea of what the recession will bring to Hollywood is going to be new, kind of reworking the system a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad move for Netflix to have some blockbusters that people would hang on to. And, if just that one film alone, or a film like that once a month, is worth keeping my subscription around, instead of giving me a load of content that I have to dig through and then basically go to Amazon Prime to watch something because I can't find it on Netflix.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's the big question, especially after this earnings week and some of the more disappointing numbers coming out of the streamers in particular, and the challenging headwinds they have ahead. I think the question has always been, is Hollywood recession proof? I mean, because the debate all you want, the definition of recession, most of the times it's been defined as 2 quarters of negative growth, which we have proved that we have. So we're more or less in a recession. And I think Hollywood is always looked upon as sort of recession proof because it's like an escape. You go to the movies. What are you going to do if you don't want to spend an expensive dinner? You go to the movies. I think the bigger issue now is so much content is being pushed onto the streamer, so you don't have to leave the house. Prices are going up. And I think the other thing is there's not a lot of movies coming out. So I think it's going to be one of those weird things where you're going to have not a lot of movies in theaters. So people are going to turn to their streamers, but the streamers have all, don't have varying qualities of content. So I think there's going to be a lot of churn. I think there's going to be a lot of people being like, well, we can get by with just Apple TV and Netflix, or we can just get by with Netflix because Netflix has what we're used to, and we're used to that, or in Netflix and Amazon Prime because I get more value for my money from Amazon Prime. So I think a lot of the streamers that are starting up, like Peacock, like Paramount Plus, in some ways Apple TV Plus, and in some ways HBO Max, Discovery Plus Max, whatever it's going to be, I think are all going to face a lot of tough choices over the course of the next few months. It's particularly HBO Max and Discovery because Warner Brothers Discovery has a lot of tough choices coming up because they are in the midst of heavy debt load that they've got to cut, and David Zaslav has made it clear that to this Wall Street that he's going to committed to $3 billion in savings, so he's got to find that money somewhere. And as we know, he's not scared to pull the plug on a movie.
Well, what's interesting also is, and I'll give kudos to Netflix on this one too, is the way they were supporting Dave Chappelle and allowing kind of it becoming a platform for something in a way for the way they're doing that. is
Yep.
interesting. And I'll say supporting Dave Chappelle. I honestly feel like Dave Chappelle is doing a pretty good job of supporting himself. I think he's very clear what his message is, and I think there's an understanding of what the conversation he's trying to have.
Right.
So he's in the middle of a, putting himself in the middle, so a dialogue will take place, and his genius allows that to take place. But I just saw Dave Chappelle's acceptance speech for the theater of the high school he went to.
Right.
Was dedicated in his name, and his acceptance speech. And once again, Netflix covered it, and Dave Chappelle did a good job.
Yeah.
Maybe even a bigger thought, and I think that this was a very awesome Netflix play, is their whole comedy world. Comedy hasn't died. It felt like at one moment comedy was going to be dead, right? Every comedian was saying, I can't be funny anymore. Yeah, without being canceled. So they all got really quiet for a while. And I'm here in LA. I actually went to Jim Gaffigan last night live at the Orange County Fair. And I'll just say, like, I think comedy is where comedy needs to be. It's a little bit edgy. It's talking about the items that are up front in everyone's life right now. And Netflix is becoming a platform for a voice, really, of a dialogue, using comedy to do it, but a dialogue to take the place. That's pretty awesome too. And I think that for Netflix to recognize the platform they can become, to give a voice to something that, if it was on YouTube, it would be canceled because it's about the public vote. And in Netflix case, they can recognize something and say, no, we think this is important. We think this is critical. We understand what's going on. We'll take the heat. We're going to keep it going. That's it's powerful, but it's interesting that they have the opportunity to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that they've been willing to sort of stand up for their talent. And Ted Sarandos made a comment saying, listen, if you're made uncomfortable by some of this content, maybe Netflix isn't the right place for you, because we're going to allow our creators to express their vision, their voice, and we don't find any of this beyond the pale offensive. And Bill Barr's another one, who's another comedian who
his Red Rock special was
who
really amazing.
He waded into some really contentious social issues, and that's comedy. It helps us sort of see. I mean, if we can't laugh at certain points throughout this ridiculousness that is the human existence at times, then we're all sunk. So I think it's great that Netflix has sort of become that voice. But again, on the film side, I think they still have to focus on quality and not quantity. And I still think they're trying to figure out what that looks like. And, they're losing, their licensing deals because all the other, production companies / studios have started their own streamers. So they're losing. So they really do have to churn out content. I understand the strategy behind it. I just think now they have to really step back and start focusing on finding out a way to up the quality a little bit without having to spend $250 million on movies.
So I'm going to ask you a movie question here too, because, just along that same idea, is the big movie budget just dead? And I'm thinking specifically like what Warner Brothers doing with Batgirl, just shelving that. One, I question what the hell's going on with Warner Brothers, right? They seem, unlike Paramount, that seem to figure out something. Warner Brothers steps in it everywhere they step. But also, just like, do you think there is something to recognize in Batgirl being shelved from a Recession budget point of view, or is it simply just a DC universe issue?
I think what it is, you've had several years of uncertain. Warner Brothers has been kind of on a roller coaster for the last decade or so. They had relatively stable stability when Alan Horn and Barry Diller were running the studio. And Alan Horn, as I mentioned in my newsletter, has been brought back to the fold as a consultant at Warner Brothers to sort of steady the ship and help Mike DeLuca and Pam Abdi sort of guide through the next phase of whatever Warner Brothers ends up being. So I think because of that, there's been a lot of, again, it goes to sort of a quality issue. When it does somehow have to do with DC. So just to give you a little history, when Jeff Robinoff hired Zack Snyder to do Man of Steel. Robinoff was telling anyone who would listen, this is going to be the biggest movie in Warner Brothers history. It didn't quite get there. It was a hit, no doubt. The campaign was amazing. The movie was okay. As a Superman fan, I was not crazy about some of the mythological changes that he made, but
yeah,
nonetheless. And then Robinoff made a decision to hand the DC universe to Snyder and say, you run with it. It's your vision. You go. And then Batman versus Superman happened. Everyone's like, what the? And that sort of caused the brakes to fall. And then Robinoff was let go because Kevin Tushihara took over. And then you had Greg Silverman and Sue Kroll and Toby Emmerich sort of as the office, the bake-off between the three of them. And then ultimately Toby Emmerich won that. He got rid of Jeff Johns and John Berg, who were sort of like overseeing DC, and then brought in Walter
so it's
Hamada.
just falling apart. It's basically falling apart.
And it's David Zaslav, who Matt Maloney pointed out, writers are now calling him Zaz the Butcher because he's just slicing and dicing, which, to be fair, he has to do. There's a crap load of debt. They got almost $50 billion in debt. He's promised $3 billion in savings. And I get, as a marketer who's worked on movies that have been not great and have not really deserved a theatrical release. Listen, it's tough to swallow when it's a talent-driven town, but at the end of the day, if you have a terrible screening, which apparently Batgirl did not screen well, it didn't have the quality and the expectation that Zaslav has now said, we want to be Marvel. We want to be their quality. And now, granted, that's been said before, but clearly they're committed to it now because they saw the movie and they're like, it bumped up. It was originally budgeted at 70, got bumped up to 90 because of COVID restrictions. And they were going to have to spend a ton more, over $100 million to make it worth it. And I just think, given all that they were facing, they said, we got to pull the plug on this. Now, apparently it was not handled great. Apparently the New York Post got a hold of it. I've heard competing stories that the New York Post got a hold of it before Michael
what a PR
and Pam,
mess that is, right?
Well, Michael and Pam were able to call the directors who were actually, one was at the other's wedding somewhere, and they got the call, and they hadn't called talent yet. It's a very interesting. It's a microcosm of everything that's going on and the changes in Hollywood. Because the other aspect of this is when Jason Kilar instituted Project Popcorn and put all those movies on HBO Max, which arguably helped HBO Max quite well, actually.
Sure.
And it didn't, putting it on HBO, on Batman on HBO Max, didn't kill the box office. So it didn't look like it was a total failure. But the agents were out in arms. Like, this is ridiculous. Particularly Brian Lord came out and said, this is not, what are you doing? And now the agents are surprisingly quiet. There's been no this is not how we operate in this town. And maybe that's because Brian Lord was heavily involved in sort of introducing Zaslav around town to all, executives, and was sort of like helping him get the lay of the land of what it's like to work in Hollywood. So it's interesting that, again, there's been no talk. Now, granted, I don't know the reps on any of the people who were involved in Batgirl, so maybe CAA had a very low interest in the movie, which could be very reason. But as far as a precedent, it's big when you kill a movie like this, especially when it's on such a big franchise like Batgirl.
Oh yeah.
And then at the same time,
there's a built-in audience, like the built-in audience for the DC universe.
And they were bringing Michael Keaton back, the original Batman. He's in this movie. He's in Batgirl. Now the argument could probably be made that they should release it because now everybody wants to see it. Because they're like, okay, is this really that bad? Now I really want to see it. So,
but listen, it's not finished, right? That's part of the.
No, it was in post. They I guess a week or two ago, they had a screening that did not play particularly well, and I feel for exec like Walter Hamada, who's been trying to navigate between all these changes. And unfortunately, I guess he found out about it at the screening, was not consulted. So I think he feels a little slighted, and he's been trying to do what like Jason Kilar was the one, we need to put DC movies on HBO Max. So that's the execution that Walter Hamada went down. And now it's sort of like, okay, no, we're going to scrap that. We're going to do what Marvel does. We're going to have a 10-year plan. Alan Horn's coming over. He's going to help us sort of build out Marvel. We're going to do exactly similar to what Disney did. We'll see if it works. I mean, the other thing, DC also has somewhat of a darker edge to it. It always has. I mean, Batman was a darker character, and they have some darker characters. And, you know, Marvel has that sort of light comic booky quality to it. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see how they're going to affect that well in the DC universe, because
it is interesting. Like, the more famous heroes growing up were Wonder Woman, Batman
and Superman. Right.
Easily. Right.
Yeah.
And Spider-Man. So the only
that's Marvel.
The only major character I would know from Marvel immediately would be Spider-Man. And it's interesting how the Marvel universe seemed to have a longer play and longer legs than the three major big players. Now, of course, Batman TV shows and Batman films kind of have always been made. Superman films and Superman TV shows,
right,
has always been out there, and Wonder Woman also, right? So those characters have played themselves out more, and Marvel was a little bit behind. So the introduction of a character that I wasn't as familiar with in the Marvel universe is more genuine than seeing another version of Batman.
Yeah, that's a great, I mean, because DC really kind of dominated. It was really, I mean, I remember seeing, you know, everybody remembers the Richard Donner Superman, which was really the first foray into sort of taking a comic book character and making them feel like, you know, a movie spectacle. And, you know, then you had Tim Burton and Batman, and then you had the countless Batman shows in the 60s and Wonder Woman in the 80s and 70s and 80s. And then Marvel was just kind of not, they released these cheesy movies here and there, but nothing major. And then all of a sudden, Kevin Feige shows up and, you know, completely reinvents the wheel. And then all of a sudden, DC is just sort of left behind. I think it's going to come down to them finding someone. I mean, it's easy to say he's got to find his Kevin Feige. I mean, Dave Zaslav has to find his Kevin Feige. And I don't know. Maybe it's that he'd try to poach one of the junior execs from Marvel. I don't know. I mean, it's definitely going to be.
Find another kind of universe. Why does it be a superhero universe? You know, like,
well,
Star Wars is also a universe that they figured out. Like, if you're going to do the universe play, you're not stuck.
Well, it's true. And they're also looking, I mean, to David Zaslav credit, he's reached out to J.K. Rowling to talk about, you know, expanding the Harry Potter universe, which is great. And, you know, there are other aspects that they can do, but I think right now it's all about superheroes, because those are those big spectacle movies that people will pay to see, as we've witnessed over the last few months. And I think that's what the Wall Street's expecting. And, you know, Zaslav has a lot of work to do, you know, to get to that point. So it's not going to be an easy road for them. I don't envy them at all. And I having been on sort of tangentially involved in very tough conversations with talent, it's never easy to call talent on movies being pulled from the slate and basically being buried.
Yeah.
And they're just going to take the tax write-off. That's never easy to hear. And, you know, they're supposedly going to be rebuilding the universe, so we'll see what happens. So
interesting. What's interesting is they got beyond the sunk cost bias. Like, that's a big budget just to throw away. But you know that someone ran some numbers and thought,
there were numbers, and the tax write-off. You know, I'm sure that all those numbers were run, and they didn't think it was worth the risk to try to fix the movie in post, which happens a lot. I mean, people would be surprised, even with Marvel movies. There are a lot of movies where after the original production ends and you get an assembly and you get a director's assembly, you're like, whoa, we got a lot of work to do. And, you know, that's what Feige's brilliant at. He's really good at stepping in and fixing the problems. And I think the thing that DC really has to do is start to find directors who are fans of the properties, because that's what Marvel did so brilliantly. They found directors who were big fans of comic book fans as kids and didn't really want to mess with the mythology. Zack Snyder, I don't think, was a big comic book fan. And I think he came in, he's like, you know what, Superman's lame. We're gonna change him. We're not gonna have his dad die of a heart attack, so Superman understands that he can't save everyone. He's not a god. And no, we're just going to have everyone hate Superman, and then he's going to murder Zod. I mean, I could quibble all day about it, but that in and of itself, I think, was the first step that sort of really kind of messed it up for DC.
Well,
And
yeah,
their
to
leadership
make
changes.
to follow a lore that everyone already loves, and to make your own lore, you better know what you're
Yeah.
what you're up
And
against.
to be fair, the constant revolving door of leadership changes at Warner Brothers over the last decade has definitely obviously led to where we are today, whereas Disney was relatively stable. And I think you can see that in the quality of their films.
I'm just going to point out that Hollywood is not going to get out of this recession unless you start going to the movies, Keith. So you actually just start spending $9 every once in a while to help us.
Well, I would.
Keep
Yeah,
this
I mean,
industry
I
going.
know. I need to go start. I recognize that, but I thank you, Tim. I'm glad you're here to continuously berate me about not going to the movies. I realize I have to start going more. And
I'm just making a list. I have Elvis for you. I just added Gray Man for you.
Yeah. Well, the challenge is that my wife and I have very divergent tastes in film, so that is part of the difficulty, because she does not like half the movies I like. I had to go see Top Gun by myself.
You could go to Downton Abbey. You can do that just fine.
Well, I mean, we can absolutely do that, but she's not going to go see Elvis. She's not going to want to watch Gray Man. I can tell you that right now. That's definitely not in her wheelhouse. So it's that, and managing the fact that the kids are always running around being crazy. So I'm just going to make excuses.
That's part of the recession. Is all the people that had kids during the pandemic is now slowing down. People are getting
it's all part of it. Yep, that's exactly right. That's totally what it is.
All right, my friend. Well, you have a great week. Enjoy sailing up there in Maine.
I'll try. Thanks, Tim.
I'll watch the movies for you. I'll go twice to every film.
You go twice, and then you can report back to me, and then I'll eventually tell you how wrong you were about your review.
Perfect. I love it. That's the way it seems to be working.
That seems to work perfectly. So there you go.
All right. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.